Hello, everybody. It's Jav Mrnakovich with Oregon State University Permaculture Design course. This is the Winter-Spring 2023 course. This is our fourth office hours. I do indeed sound like Barry White because I have a serious bug that is affecting lots of things. One of them being a coughing fit. So if I go muted, that is why. Hey, I might even turn off my my image because who wants to watch somebody else cough, really? So we've got a couple of great questions, one from Sergey, Kana, and then Taylor. If anybody has a question as we're going throughout this, we'll just ask everyone to mute themselves. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, if there's any more questions, let's pop them into the question and answer doc. And again, if anybody wants to ask a question live, you can do that too. Or if you have any thoughts or questions or queries about the course concepts, it's your time. So we dedicate it to answering questions, but we can do anything. Anything I say, anything. I've also reconfigured my monitor setup, and I don't know if I love it. Pretty sure I don't. So there's lots of looking over. So can everyone see the images, the questions? That would be the word. I'm still hearing somebody. Hold on. Participants, Max. I'm going to mute you, buddy. Nothing against you. And Taylor, thanks, buddy. And Joseph, I'm going to mute. And then I'm going to click the old mute all upon entry, continue, and then yeah, that should do it. Max, you just keep on muting, buddy. I don't know what that's about. Okay. And again. Okay. So, you know what? I'm going to move the questions over here because my mic is right here. That'll be easier. Max, I don't know what's going on, but you keep muting and unmuting. So if you can figure that out, that'd be awesome. Let's jump into this. So, Sergey, links to photos illustrating the question, shoreline. Here we go. Max, I'm just going to mute you again. Sorry, man. It's very distracting for me. Right. So this is the tree that came over. Okay, I should read the question first. Link to the photos illustrating the question, shoreline, looking for input on, and just a point of order here. Freshwater shoreline erosion is different than maritime erosion. So just a good thing to put in there. General erosion during big flood and rain events, plus foot and dog traffic along the water's edge disturbing the grass moss. Area we enter water for swimming is visibly receding over years. Tree recently was taken down during a storm. The whole root system area is badly damaged and disturbed. The current thinking is live-stake along water edge into disturbed root area of fallen tree. Bring 1 to 2 yards of top soil to cover the roots. Live stake along 15 to 20 feet. Buffer. Oh, there's Max again. I'm gonna mute you again. Live stake along 15 to 20 foot buffer inland, seed ground cover, mulch path with jute fiber over its 5 to 6 feet away along the water edge to reduce foot traffic caused erosion, or plankway with a bottom 2x4s rebarred into the ground and media lunas on both sides. On both sides. Couple bluestone slabs where the water enters to swim. Okay, so this is hard to talk about without an overhead. So, Sergey, I don't know if you have an overhead of what this looks like, but this looks like a depositional area. And so I want to talk a little bit about how rivers erode, what that looks like, and then what we might be able to do about it. These are great photos, by the way. This is great. This is really helpful. So what it looks like, and Sergey, feel free to unmute yourself and we can kind of chat about this. But from what I'm seeing here, it looks like the water is flowing. And I don't know which way the water's flowing, but it looks like the water is coming around this way. So normally that would mean this is what's called the cut bank, and this is what's called the depositional bank or depositional area. So what that looks like is if we have a river that goes back and forth like this, it means that one area is the cut area. This is the outside area. So basically the water cuts away. This is where we get things like head cuts. So in profile, if this is the river and this is the cut bank, what'll happen is you'll end up with something like this, where this area underneath will have what's called a head cut. And these are really problematic because you could step on these and and there's potential for loss of life there. So yeah, Sergey, I see you've unmuted. So can you tell me a little bit about the water flow here?
Yeah, you're correct. The water is flowing towards the camera.
Okay.
And the opposite bank is pretty straight run for quite a while.
Okay. All right. So basically it's coming this way, curving around. And basically, so this would be cut, and this would be depositional. And this is interesting because we get a chance to do a little bit of reading the landscape. If I saw this and didn't know what was going on with the river, I would say that this probably floods because it looks like the soil underneath these trees is being eroded. And the only way that can happen on a depositional area, and just so we're keeping with our different colors and whatnot here. So that's on the inside here. So this is depositional. Outside is cut. Inside is depositional, which basically means that as the water comes this way and it has sedimentation, as it flips this way, that there's centripetal. There's a force with spheres. Centrifugal. Thank you, sir. That basically whips things out on the edge. And that also means that it gets calm in the center. And so when it gets calm in the center, the sedimentation drops. And so you see kind of these point bars, and we're seeing quite a bit of fine material here. The other reason for this being problematic is that with those fines, it doesn't really create lots of great soil for a tree to embed into. I just saw that there's a chat here. I don't know what's going wrong with my mic. No worries, Max. So it's coming this way, and we've got this great potential idea that that Max has put on here. And this is such a great way of showing how easy this can be put in. So thinking like a bluestone slab to get down to the river, media luna. Yeah, we'll talk about media luna in a second. I'm going to hold on to that one. Grasses, live stake. So live staking is a great idea. And I don't know if we've talked about it publicly in this course, but we'll just take a moment to do so. So a number of trees are pioneers, and pioneer trees like willow, alder, red osier, dogwood. And what you can do is you can cut the branches of those trees, take a piece of rebar that's roughly the same size, dig a hole with that rebar by pounding it into the ground, usually 0.5 meter, a couple of feet, and then sticking that piece of willow, red osier, dogwood, or alder in buds up, of course. And then what'll happen is that it'll live stake. So it'll rapidly grow out and rapidly become a tree. And so one of the solutions here, which I think you've hit the nail on the head, really well done, by the by, is to live stake this area. Which I think is right on. Now, the problem with live staking is it creates this really cool sedimentation. So let's say this is the river flow. Let's not use green. Let's say this is the river flow. And let's say we do a whole bunch of live staking. So we do live stake and live stake and live stake. Well, what ends up happening is these little live stakes, they create this cool little eddy. It's almost like a erosion, an erosion feature, which I'm obviously missing the word for. This is the quality I have for everyone today. It's usually at the tip of my tongue. I'll think about it. But basically, it creates this little erosional pathway. And so what happens is when the water comes around here, it creates this little vortex and creates a quiet area. And so the sedimentation can drop out. And so what'll happen with live stakes is that over time, you'll actually get sedimentation that builds up behind them, which is pretty fantastic. Now, Sergey, what is the frequency of which this area floods?
So this area where we're looking at, probably every couple months.
Yeah.
Any big rain.
Yeah, that was my worry. So if you flood that much, the ground cover is going to wash away. So you're gonna buy seed or find seeds. You're going to put it into the soil, and it's going to wash away. So I wouldn't muck about with ground covers right now. So you had some great ground covers that normally would be fine. I'm just going to go back to the question here. Oh, that one. It's a question. So yeah. So yeah, I wouldn't do the ground covers because I think you're going to have problems with the ground cover. But what I would do is that over time, as you build up more soil in these areas, I might then plant shrubs beneath this willow, alder, and red osier dogwood. So any of these shrubs, whatever they may or may not be, I would basically take cuttings, take a look and see if there's, well, first species identify them so you can understand what they are, and then understand their propagation modality, and then use that in situ. And then I would work at sort of a little forest edge. But those ground covers, I think they're going to be problematic. I'm just going to go
Even if I do plugs.
Things like, let me just go back because you said what they were. That was that piece. No, that was up here. What was the ground cover again?
I said carex and some, water edge grasses.
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah, sedges, grasses, reeds, things of that nature. Sorry, I thought I might be mixing up two different questions here. Oh yeah, I am. This was this question, the buckwheat dichonic clover. Yeah, so I think if those are your ground covers, that's totally fine. So I think, yeah, generally your design is good. I would be conscientious about doing mulched pathways at the beginning, and then I would take a look maybe in year 2 or year 3, see if it made any sense to do mulched pathways. If it floods that much, you're going to lose the mulch. So if you do want to have something raised up so you can go down there during flooding, then yeah, a raised walkway would be great. And then conservation associations, specifically ones that work with wetlands, they have a whole way of designing and building raised walkways. They usually do free classes, which is phenomenal. I took a class years ago, and just the way they did it with the wood and the rebar, and I can't quite remember how it was done, but I would reach out to a local wetland conservation organization and just talk to them about how that's done. And then the last thing is a media luna. So when we take a look at media lunas are usually created to either concentrate flow or to allow flow to spread out. So you might be talking about riparian riprap, and rocking this up a bit more, which I could see. But in terms of like the control that is called a media luna, I don't think that's exactly what you're looking for, because this would actually be large scale boulders. These would be large scale boulders that were embedded into the landscape. So I don't think a media luna would be the right solution here, just because of the amount of water and inundation. Does that make sense, mate?
Yep. So like putting some big rocks right where the water edge right now, and then planting willow kind of in between them, that can be one of the solutions.
Yeah. And I would say play around. You've got willow, you got red rose or dogwood, you got alder. I think I don't remember where you are, but where I saw you were, I think it made sense. What were you, in New York or something?
Yep.
Yeah,
That's New York.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of bringing in color to landscapes. So if I can bring in red rose or dogwood or some of the more interesting willows, I will, as long as they make sense, right? As long as they're within the ecological patterns and blueprints of that area. Not to mention, you can then play around with, if this is of interest to you, but living fences and things like hedge laying and living furniture, which I have a huge love of. But I think what'll happen is over time, you're going to lose these 2 trees on the left-hand side. And this one down here looks like it's on its way. So over time, what you're doing is you're shoring it up. And what you might do is you might even move some of these live stakes into the water flow. They don't necessarily just have to be on land. We did this in oh, that's definitely not the right drawing tool. We did this on a site. So it was like this. And the land, let's see how my drawing skills are. Not terrible. The land was stopped here, and we live staked basically into the channel. And what this did is it created protection for the area that was on land. So something you could do here is, if you wanted to protect these guys, you could go in. I'm going to use orange just so we can see it in contrast. You could go in and you could live stake out into the water's edge at a time when generally that flow is low. You're coming into the rains. So usually fall, I would say, in your biome. And you can kind of go out that way. And what that'll do is that'll create that first protection for everything else that's behind it. And then actually in that case, I would say that the plugs would make more sense, and probably be a little bit easier to do. Looks like Max is putting some videos on there. Yeah, there's a lot of great stream control restoration processes and programs. The main thing to keep in mind with all of these is that everyone comes at it with their certain take. And so just a word of warning to take a look at it as compiling tools. And I haven't seen this video that Max posted, but every stream is going to be a little different. Each ecology is going to be a bit different. Your outcomes are, of course, going to be different. So just be conscientious of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, sir. Question number 2. Ideas on how to establish productive growth on top of 2 to 3 feet of construction debris. A flat area above regular floodplain near the creek is 2 to 3 feet of construction debris trucked in by previous owner. Stone and brick smattering of topsoil. Next to impossible to dig by hand, around 300 square feet. Currently partially covered by wild raspberries, poison ivy, early stage knotweed. Grasses, some carex. Right, that's what I was trying to understand. I got it now. Area gets flooded once or twice a year during hurricanes, strong storms. Mostly shaded. Vision is edible tree and shrub planting. Open camp area covered in carex. Currently thinking as establishing restoration plots 100 to 125 feet square, lined with stones, trees, trunks, bringing topsoil, seeding with buckwheat, daikon clover to open up soil and build fertility. Move to the next plot next year. Gradually move Norway maples on southeast. So how close is this to the creek in terms of horizontal distance?
So about 30 feet.
Come again?
About 30 feet.
30 feet. Okay. So it doesn't get that monthly flooding. It just sort of gets the 1 or 2 floods a year.
Yeah, it's about 4 feet higher than that plane that we were looking at. So it only gets flooded during like really, really big stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So something here to consider, and you've already come to it, but as a concept, which is great that you've hit on, is this idea of island cultivation. So you're basically having these little coral reefs of cultivation, and you're picking and choosing. You're making your raised beds. You're making your raised beds. You're planting into them, and then you're moving on to the next one. I think it's a great idea. I think if you can find areas within that that debris that potentially go down to parent material, parent soil, I would focus on those areas and potentially dig them out a little bit, and potentially do a little bit of hugelkultur in and around that area. I think would be useful. But I think it's a great idea. My one worry is that if you do build up the beds, just make sure that the beds are built up higher than what that 1 or 2 flood level is a year. Because you will lose your buckwheat, daikon, and clover if it's seeded and it's flooded, right? Any further questions about that one?
No, I think that's kind of like, yeah, it definitely. The idea was for this island plantings, and it does seem like it's a way forward there, without major expense of shoring up the whole area and 75 yards of topsoil.
Yeah, and ultimately it's going to be problematic moving forward trying to do it all. But if you do work on different areas in that way, I think you're going to find that it builds on itself. Third question, microclimate question: how to deal with portions of the property that change their microclimate based on the time of day year. For example, my backyard facing west and the creek gets blistering hot during summer afternoons, goes from crazy warm to about frosty at night. In the fall, due to the creek's cold air, and at night turns 10 degrees colder than the road east facing the house. Should I do summer winter profiles? Absolutely. So I think I talk about this in the tutorial, but if they're dramatically different, it's a great idea to do 2 different profiles. Same thing actually with the zones. So if your winter zones are so much different than your summer zones, it's a good idea to map both. So great question. Thank you for that. Okay, Kana. My landscape is bare, sloped, and floor is scrub. Also, there aren't any buildings. It seems that everywhere is affected by wind, sunlight, fire, etc. For example, winter wind only comes from the far east or the east side, but it seems that every point of my landscape is affected. I know that prevailing wind comes from northeast side, but when I put myself on the edge of southeast and southwest, these places are affected by prevailing wind. I can't imagine how I comment. After all, it is difficult to specify microclimate. Hold up, just gotta, we'll get that one back too. Just specify key lines so I could separate top hill, mid range, and low range. Okay, Kenna, I'm just gonna, oh yeah, you are here. Can you explain what your question is in this in terms of is your question, how do you monitor or detail your microclimates?
My landscape is, yeah, all area is affected by the sun, by the wind, but I have, okay, solar aspects. For example, my prevailing wind comes from the northeast, but every point on my landscape is affected the same. Yani, so there is no moist soil, any dry soil. I can separate it because the sun, wind is same.
So you're saying that your site is affected uniformly by the different abiotic factors. And so your sense is that they're all like, it's one big microclimate. There's actually no delineations on site.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. If that's how your site presents, that's fine. I ended up working on a sort of a bald peak once, and it was very similar. It was a little bit different because the northeast side had some wind, but yeah, if that's what it is, then that's totally fine. Okay, so I would just say you've got one.
I checked my friends' designs, so they are so colorful. They have everything, but I can't find anything. But this, if you say it's okay, okay, fine.
Yeah, I get it. And it's easy to take a look at everybody else's assignments and say, I want my sign to look like theirs, some kind of level of assignment envy. But our sites are our sites. And so if they're all the same, like if it's basically same moisture profile, same solar access, same temperature range, then you have one microclimate. That's fine. No problems. Okay, so I'm just going to put live answer there. Do this, there aren't any buildings. I can specifically current zones. Yeah, so I would just say kind of for you, when currently, what is the frequency? Is somebody going to the site, once a year, once every month, once every week? It may be that the whole site is zone 4. It may be that the whole site is zone 5. Like it hasn't been touched by humans in quite a long time. So generally, like, what's that frequency? And if whatever that is, that will be your zones, and you just won't have the other zones, and that's okay too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay. About my fire risk, my prevailing wind comes from northeast. The wind at July from north. The slope of landscape begins from southeast to northwest. So I think that the July fire risk area is north to northeast side. If I think slope effect for risk of fire, I should specify fire risk is southeast to southwest. With all this information, I can say the risk of fire is all around my landscape. Yep, 100%. Yeah, I would say that's true. After we finish the course, we'll be able to access all the learning materials and discussion pages. Yes, so you've got access to the entire course as long as OSU is a thing and the internet is a thing. So yes, as long as you've got it. Taylor, do you have a good resource for identifying plants in the winter? I'm finding this a little challenging at the moment. I took a quick look at your resources link, didn't find anything that seemed to be specific to this, but I apologize if I just missed it. No, man, you're right. It's hard to do. I got into Bark ID a couple of years ago, and I still make a lot of mistakes just because it's there. A lot of trees end up looking like each other in the winter. Sometimes you can tell by the branching pattern and by the buds in spring before leaf out. But generally, it can be difficult to do. If you do want to get into it, I found a reddit.com subreddit that was all about tree ID. And there's kind of a couple of aficionados that worked in, it might have actually just been plant ID. And I might have just found a couple of diehard nerds that loved IDing plants in the winter. But outside of that, once you get to the shrub layer, some shrubs are actually really identifiable. Bread or dogwood's a great one. Vaccinium, Just the way that the bark peels is another good, or pardon me, Lucernia, the honeyberry, not vaccinium. And once you get down after that, most of those perennial and, well, the perennial and the annual herbaceous, you're not going to see those. So basically you're just talking about perennials. So it's a hard thing to do, but it's kind of a fun thing to do because it gives you just a little bit more ability. So what I would do is in Minneapolis, sorry, in your area, I would seek to see if there's like an Audubon guide or a Lone Peak guide or a Lone Pine guide that specifies trees, and focus on the bark and start to go through the dichotomous key within that book, which is a way of going with yes/no questions to come down to a potential answer. And once you have that idea, once you've done that yourself, then I would put it towards these plant ID groups or plant ID maps, apps. Google Lens is getting better, but I think I actually have a bunch of them up here. Yeah, so picture this, iNaturalist is pretty good. So you can kind of use that to build your knowledge and then double check from those applications. So I'd probably do it that way, but it's not easy, and that's why there's no book, because there's no like specific book, because the tree ranges are so different in everybody's different biomes. It's a really good question though. Does that answer the question, Taylor? Anything else?
That was the answer I guess I was afraid of.
Hard work. Yeah, fair enough.
But it's nice to have that observation validated.
Okay.
In terms of the assignment, would you prefer that, I just do my best now with that? Or is this something I should loop around back to in a couple months once things become a little bit more obvious?
I would say do your best. And if you want to loop back around and just make sure that your knowledge is increased, because really that's all we're doing here. This is just a process to increase your knowledge. I don't care what you come up with. Nobody at OSU cares. This is a course to build your own capacity and conversation and ability. So I think it would be worthwhile for your education to come back and go, okay, here was my assumptions. And now that things have leafed out and I have more information, here's what I've come to. I think that would be useful. So yeah, I would come back to it. Oh, cool.
Okay,
So
cool. Good advice.
Yeah, no worries. Max is in the chat, said this book has helped me with tree identification, winter tree fitter. Cool. Thanks, Max. Lots of good resources. I appreciate that. That's the great thing about these courses is we've got a chance to share quite a bit. I'll take a look at both of those. I'm actually just going to do a little copy paste on these two. Check them out afterwards. All right, folks, that's the end of our listed questions. Is there anything that anybody wants to chat about, either from a concept base, the course itself, something that's going well, something that's frustrating? Yeah. Anybody want to pick up a conversation about something, or is that it for us today?
Yeah, so I was curious about grass. Last season I had quite a struggle with how to efficiently first convert grass and then also prevent it from returning. And I was watching the thing about analog species, and I wonder if there's analog species of grass or something that will take that niche and prevent it from growing back.
Right. So it's a great question. Thanks, Robin. So let's talk a little bit about grass. And as usual, we're going to go from concept pattern down to detail. So grass is a rhizome species. That means it grows and it spreads by rhizome. So that means as it's growing up and it produces its root, it's going to move laterally through the soil and then it's going to pop back up. And generally grass, like other rhizome producing plants, is going to be very pernicious. So, grass can grow back from just a little bit of root clump. So when we're removing grass, we'll talk about two things: removing grass and outcompeting it. When we're removing grass, there's a couple of ways to go about this. And we'll start with lots of effort and we'll move to low effort. So lots of effort is you get what's called a sod cutter. And basically you're going to rip, I think they're about 12-inch or 16-inch widths of sod. And it's going to roll up into that same sort of roll you'll see that people lay down in landscaping. After that, once you have that ground level, you can do one of two things. Most people leave it at that and then just go at the planting. I've found that it's useful to go in with a slight, almost tilting depth, 2 to 5 inches, till up and do what's called a rake. So basically, as you're going through and you're raking tilled soil, the large particle within that soil will come to the surface. This is the idea of if you've got like a bag of nuts and you're shaking it, the big nuts come to the top. They also use this in avalanche safety, where a lot of these avalanche safety mechanisms encapsulate the person in this big bubble, and you come to the surface, you rise to the surface. So when you're dealing with a rhizome species, this is true of a lot of the invasive grasses. So canary reed grass, Japanese knotweed, lots of the brooms and bromes. If you do a till, you're basically digging up the root material. You're also cutting it, which is problematic because, of course, now instead of like one plant, you have 1,000. And then you rake it and you rake it and you rake it and you rake it, and all of that comes to the top. And then you take all of that, you put it in a tarp and you let it sit for 1.5 years. What's important to understand is that this approach is to avoid using something like an insecticide, or pardon me, a biocide, using something that you're going to spray and then have contamination with the soil. So using this mechanical approach can remove those rhizomes, and then you can go in and plant right away. You can apply your aerated compost extracts, your aerated compost teas. You can apply any amendments into the soil, because if the soil is up and disturbed, it's a great time to integrate in your biochars, activated biochars, or if you are trying to increase at scale, working with some kind of amendment, you can put it in. After that, you plant. And basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to outcompete any of the existing genetic bank within that soil. So at this point, there's kind of 2 choices. If you've amended only with abiotic amendments, you haven't amended with anything living, any seeds or anything, you can do what's called a stale seed bed. And basically what you do is you take silage tarping, that's usually 3 to 6 mil, that's the thickness, black on one side, white on the other, and you basically tarp off the entire area. Usually the black is always up, unless you're into tropical climes and you don't want to overheat and burn out your soil, because normally we're trying to bring heat to this area, because what we're trying to do is get the soil's genetic seed bank to express itself. It'll express itself, it'll hit the underside of the plastic. Without sunlight, it'll die out. It'll die out. The next seed will be expressed, it'll die out. You know what I mean? Back and forth, back and forth. And so you get what's called a stale seed bed. And this is typically how I do my annual gardens. So I typically will tarp them after the last melt of winter, because winter, of course, is charging my beds with water. So I don't want to stop that. So after that, I will then tarp them. And usually it'll rain like the dickens, but that's fine. And then basically after 3 weeks to 4 weeks, I can remove those tarps and I have no weed pressure for the entire season. My annual beds have no weed pressure. Every once in a while, there's a little seed that pops up. It's easy to pick and pluck. That's it. I do this with my hookah cultures too, my production hookah culture beds. So that's sort of, super labor intensive. If you don't want to remove the grass, you can scalp it. So you can take a string trimmer, or you can take a lawnmower and go set it really low. And you can basically scalp the grass down to the crown. We talked about the crown before, but again, the crown is where the vegetative part of the plant becomes the root part of the plant, and generally is considered the brain of the plant. And generally, if you scalp into the crown, it's a pretty traumatic wound for the plant. And once you do that, you can apply agricultural strength vinegar. In Canada, we call it Munger's vinegar. It's like 12%. You can dilute it a bit, but generally you want it at a high strength, put it into a backpack spray, and you're basically spraying into the meristem of the plant. I've successfully done this with bindweed, which is pretty remarkable. Folks have said that they've used this. I had a student last year who did this with I think a tree of heaven that was sprouting. Apparently it worked as well, which is great. They had tried a bunch of different things. And so for very pernicious things, I tend to cut and spray with agriculture vinegar, and cut and spray with, and like over and over again. And so this is a really like low effort, low work, like depending on the size, it could be a day or whatnot. And you do it kind of every season, and you do it kind of a few years before you're ready for it. And then you tarp it. So you do the exact same thing. Now, in this case, we're not necessarily creating a stale seed bed because we're not down to soil, but what we're doing is we're solarizing it. And people always go back and forth. Should you use a clear or should you use an opaque? I tend to think an opaque works better only because it has more versatility in my landscape. So I can use it someplace else. And that's the great thing about silage tarping is you can have it for 10, 15 years. If you use the clear stuff, it can get really gnarly because it promotes a lot of growth. And so you get these like greenhouse effects, and sometimes it can be too much, and sometimes it can kind of go sideways on you. But generally, I'll use those opaque black and white silage tarps. And then when you come back, what you'll find is the majority of the grass has died after 1 or 2 years, and you don't necessarily have to remove it because now the majority of the roots are dead. Notice I said majority. There's going to be some grass left in there. So you hypothetically can plant into this, but it can be problematic. So normally what we do is we do a mulch. We do usually a thick cardboard mulch or a thick paper mulch. And if we are creating beds, what we'll do is we'll create vertical cuts with the shovel, and we'll kind of line the cardboard into it because, again, grass grows laterally. And so this is an important thing for anybody who's making garden beds and has grass that they're edging up to. You do want to create that vertical cut, usually quite deep. You kind of want to go down 12 inches because you want to get lower than the grass roots. And it's the same thing if you're doing raised garden beds, right? You want to occlude, you want to make sure that grass can't get into the soil medium that you're bringing onto site. And so that would be the same for Sergey or anybody else that's working, in a raised bed configuration. Doesn't matter what the materials are. You just want to be conscientious that anything that's rhizome, that propagates by rhizome, doesn't then find its way in there and then starts to go hog wild. And then there's solarization. And then for conventional folks, they'll do a wild spray of like some pretty gnarly chemicals. So, if you go that route, now you've obliterated the soil food web, and now you got to go and you got to do a lot of reclamation. And I've had to do that a few times after somebody else came in. But yeah, it just depends on your timing and how big your area is and how big your approach is. So questions about that?
Yeah, so 2 questions. Do you have to do the sod cutter, or can you just lay a tarp or do you have to cut it first?
No, you can just lay a tarp. Like you can skip the sod cutting, you can skip the scalping, you can skip the agricultural mungers. There's just, I kind of gave you most effort and most successful, and down to least effort and least successful. So yes, of course you can just put a tarp, but chances are it'll be problematic. One thing we did years ago, which worked really well, was a lot of work. We put fresh chicken manure down on the grass, and because it's so nitrogen filled, it burnt out the grass pretty quickly, and then we tarped it. So we basically had a manure spreader, grab chicken manure, and it's not very easy to spread chicken manure, and it's not very pleasurable. So there's a lot of reasons why I never did this again, and probably why I didn't think of it. So you spread out that chicken manure, you throw on the tarp. Yeah, you want any other smell by the end of the day because it's full on. But that works really well because basically what you're doing is you're overfeeding the plant. And so we ended up doing this again. And I just picked up some artificial nitrogen fertilizer and I spread that. It was like granular form or something, like super easy. One of those little walk behinds that put this nitrogen in it, just went, you know what I'm talking about. And it worked really well. Both worked really, really well because basically what you're doing is you're asking the plant to outgrow itself. And then when you put the tarp on top, it's outgrown itself, and it doesn't have anything else to supplant it or to feed it because it doesn't have any sun, doesn't have any photosynthetic capacity.
Okay. What about the competing, once you've got your plants in and the grass tries to come back, or it shouldn't happen if it's fully eradicated from the soil?
Yeah, well, and that's where you get into either your dig and remove or your mulch. So I forget his name. He's got a real Christian focus back to Eden. He's the wood chip guy. And so his approach is just to bury everything in wood chips. And when you see more grass, you put more wood chips on. That also works. It's a lot of work to find and source wood chips. It's one of those things when people do, they're like, wow, it's a lot of wood chips. Well, yeah, it's close to 16 inches sometimes, or 18 inches. So it's the same thing when you're working with cardboard. It's like, you want to make sure that you have 2 inches of coverage. on everything. You want to make sure those little hole cutouts that are used for handles have coverage on them as well. So I think what's important to come into about this is that, you know, people really laud permaculture as this panacea, this holy cow that can fix everything. It can't. It's not true. But there's also a lot of these little techniques and tools, and there's issues to them. And the major issue is they usually take a lot of labor and they take a lot of time. So when you put in something like, well, I'm going to put nitrogen onto a grass, I'm going to make sure that it grows itself tremendously, and then I'm going to include it from solarization. Again, these are concepts working with the ecology, and then you know, have that as an output. Then yeah, that can be a good solution. It just depends on what are your resources, what are you trying to do, how is it going to work. So if something does come out, you can either mulch it or you can dig it and remove it. But usually with grass, it's easier to mulch it.
Okay.
And depending, you might want to mulch it again with tarps, right? You may want to do like a seasonal tarping, which is what I do in my annual beds, because I like working with bare ground. It's just easier to work with when you're doing things like tight row spacings with carrots, because like I do a 30-inch bed. That's like 25, 35 feet. And in it, I have close to like 5,000 or 6,000 pounds of carrots that I thin out throughout the season. So I don't want to have to plant in through mulch, like straw mulch or anything else. And there are some people who have taken a permaculture course, but they've also drunk the Kool-Aid, and they were like, well, there's only one way to do it if you're doing permaculture, which is why, again, I'm a lowercase p permaculturalist. It's a tool in my tool belt. And if I go to my client and they get so excited that I pull out a screwdriver because I'm a screwdriverist, it's the same thing as being a permaculturalist. It's like, no, I've got a bunch of different tools, and one of them is permaculture, and there's a couple of cool tools in there. But every once in a while, you're looking at something and you're going, well, the principles don't make sense here. So it's like, if you're dealing in a place that has no cardboard, I've seen this happen where people, they go to places like Haiti after an earthquake. They're like, okay, well, we're just going to go grab cardboard. And everyone's like, cardboard? We have no consumer economy here. What do you mean cardboard? Well, we usually go to the appliance place or the bicycle place. It's like, are you out of your mind? Like, it's just that concept that you're applying solutions to places that are not the same. And so it's kind of like being a great chef, right? We're working with fusion cooking. We have principles and concepts and processes. And so when we go to a place like Cuba and they really want to create a composting toilet, first we kind of walk through the process of like, what do you need for a composting toilet? What's the product? How do you maintain that product? How do you make sure it goes through thermo and mesophilic composting, so that way it's not only available nutrients for plants, but it's also safe for humans. Sometimes in those situations, especially when you're close to the ocean and those areas get inundated with water, you don't want to have a point source for contamination. It just doesn't make sense. You know, there's all of these different things to think through. This whole idea of that that the burden is on the designer. Like, it's our burden. If we put a plant list together, if we put an earthwork in, that burden is on us to do it right. And this is why when we take a look at orders of magnitude, so if you can think about the branching of a tree, if you could think about the branching of a waterway, you know, you've got the trunk, you've got the main river, and then you break off, and now you've got your split branching. And then in the waterway, you've got sort of your creeks, and then you split off orders of magnitude. The trunk and the river are order 1. And so we tend to learn in order 6 through 9, right? We learn at that higher level. So that way our mistakes are not on the Mississippi. They're on the trickle that comes off the back 40. It's like, oh, right, now I can read this book of nature. This is, I had the opportunity to learn with Sepp Holzer years ago. I went out to Austria and spent some time at the Kramatterhof and the Holzerhof, the farm he's at now. His son runs the Kramatterhof. And if any of you don't know Sepp Holzer by this point, that's your work for this afternoon. Look up Sepp Holzer. But Sepp had this wonderful saying, you know, the book of nature is always open to be read. And when, not if we read it wrong, when we read it wrong, it's always open for us to go and read again. And so if you're mulching with a rhizomatous grass and you see a little place poke up, be curious, like dig down to whatever your mulch layer was and be like, oh yeah, I had a group full of volunteers And with volunteers, you always have differentiation of application of what you've told them. And sure enough, there was like a 3-foot hole that didn't have any coverage. And now we've got our, our grass haven. So, be curious about things when they go wrong, because that's where we can learn. Any other questions?
Great.
Com-
Sorry, one thing for clarifying, what's
Yeah.
raking? When you said raking, is that, what do you use for raking? Like a rake
Yep.
after the sod cutter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just a rake. There's raking attachments on tractors that do the same thing. They're large rakes that basically have different tine depths that then come into the soil, and they basically pull up anything that's inside of it. There's rock rakes, but yeah, it's just a rake, a hard rake that you're pulling rhizomes or anything, and you'll get rocks and other things as well. But yeah, you're just actively raking the soil. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great question. Thanks. Anything else from anybody? Comments or questions about the course? Dali, hello.
I have a question. Since we were talking about invasive species,
Yeah.
I have two that are really bugging me: Siberian elm and Virginia's bower, I think it's called. So yeah, I figure out grass is much easier to rid of. How to rid of those that are more woody and has a much deeper roots.
Yeah. So the first
plus,
was
and plus I have an issue because they're growing really close to the other plants like rose bushes, or even in a rose bush. So I don't have idea how to rid of them.
Yeah, right. Sorry, Dali, the first one was Siberian elm and the second one was what?
I found it on the internet, Virginia's bower. B-O-W-E-R. If I pronounce it well. Yeah.
Virginian's bower, Clematis virginiana.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think we are getting those seeds. Yeah, actually wind probably brings the seeds, and those are just growing like a crazy.
Okay. Yeah. So I've had a little bit of experience of removing elm. And coming back to elm, we come back to this idea of cutting it close to or into its crown. And because elms can come back as can come back as multi-stem, or they can tunnel underground and find another spot. Basically, what I do is I cut them off as close as I can to the ground, and then I apply some industrial strength agricultural vinegar into the meristem. Usually, this takes like an application a month, and you usually have to cut again. So if I know I'm going to be taking like 2 or 3 years of cutting this, I'll usually leave it a little tall, cut it, take another inch, cut it, take another inch, and then in between cuts, I'll spray into the meristem. And over time, what that does is that vinegar will get into the root zone. It'll kill out the roots. And you won't use a lot of it. That's a nice thing about agricultural vinegar is that, in a backpack sprayer, again, make sure your backpack sprayers are not coming from conventional agricultural usage. If they come from wildland fire protection, totally fine. And they're usually the better backpack sprayers because 1, they're made to be disassembled and to be cleaned. And 2, they work really well with particulates. So if you have water that's not perfectly clean, you can take things out and all that good stuff. But never take a used backpack sprayer from an agricultural outfit. It's going to be laced with chemical and it's going to be problematic for you and what you're using. But yeah, I would cut it. And if I know I've got like 12 cuts over the next 3 years, 4 times over a season, I probably cut it a bit tall, make sure I flag it, make sure I label it with some kind of identifier. And then I'll usually put it into a spreadsheet in terms of my maintenance schedule. Like, oh, right, I've got to go do that on this landscape at this time because I'm working on that. And this is something we haven't talked about at all because it's actually not part of the permaculture core curriculum. Or the PDM, the Permaculture Designer's Manual, but documentation saves you. So generally when I'm working a landscape, I tend to have a rather extensive spreadsheet where there are elements and things that I'm doing on a seasonal basis. I make photos, I make notes, I take photos, and I'm very conscientious to go back to those photos, make sure that those photos have are accurately labeled. Nice thing with computers these days is the date created is usually native and sort of a meta piece of data. But then you can actually view the change over time. And then you can take a look for those sprouts around it to see, okay, well, the root's dying. Usually you're going to get sprouts that are coming up, and then you've got to, attack those as well. The nice thing is with this approach, as opposed to like using glyphosate, which a lot of people will do this approach with glyphosate, is that the roots won't be toxic at the end of the day. They'll be dead, but they'll just be food for the soil food web afterwards. And I would do the same thing with the clematis. Problem being is you're going to have to cut down a lot of vegetation because, of course, they spread pretty dramatically. So bring it, find where its roots are, and then solarize the material, because usually anything like that is going to be pretty vigorous. And then so put it into a tarp, make sure that decomposes by itself off in the back 40 where it's not useful or there. And then come back and again cut and apply. We did this a lot with vine material. So we had a lot of issues with vining material on the coast, things like wisteria and ivy, and worked out really, really good. So I would say I'd approach it that way. Max has a point for trunks. You can drill holes in it and apply Epsom salts mixed with water. Goats work well too. Yeah, so you can definitely graze things out. Goats aren't bad. The problem is that you don't know what's going on in the roots system. And so you definitely want to get down into the root system. And the few times I tried Epsom salts, I found that it wasn't as effective as just having a spray. Like it was just so much easier to have a spray to use. So yeah, I've tried Epsom salts and I had some success with it, but not as much success with the agriculture vinegar. But you could definitely try. You could have like 2 sets, right? And that's the great thing about labeling things. And just a point on labeling, the aluminum tags that take indentation, those are the labels I enjoy, only because you're never going to have a weathering effect on a piece of on a flagging tape, or you're going to lose your marker or whatever. I just really like using those. And then there are some metal blinds, the old slat blinds. And for years, we used to find those in garbage bins and whatnot and use them and cut them up. And we used to use those because the aluminum takes cost money. So yeah, something of value there, hopefully. And did that answer the question, Dali?
Yes, we will see how it will work.
That's usually the approach. Thanks for your question. Phyllis, I see you got your hand up there. Would you like to?
I do. We have black locust and buckthorn. Seems to be pretty common in my area. And I treated the black locust like I would say buckthorn, and it came back eightfold. It wasn't the right. So then I went to forestry suppliers, got the right chemical to treat the black locust. What was interesting for me is where I had cut it and treated the trunk, I saw that it must be a rhizome, because then next to it, it had killed the black locust on the hill as well. That was quite an interesting observation to realize that was how it was doing it. So you mentioned agriculture vinegar?
Yeah, so agricultural vinegar is a high strength, 12% usually. I usually find it at agricultural supply stores. So I'm not sure what it's called in your area. They tend to have their little areas. So we have a Bucker Fields, which is pretty ubiquitous in Western British Columbia. But you just go to your agricultural supply, give them a ring, go up, say you're looking for agricultural strength vinegar, usually at 12%.
And you would do that over something else that that would take it out because it impacts the soil web? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's what I would do. That's a choice though. So you're probably going to get a single application of a heavy duty chemical strength pesticide or biocide. I'd rather not introduce that into the local ecology, but it just depends on what you want to do. If you'd rather do one and done, and you're okay with what the application of that chemical will be in the landscape, Yeah, it's a personal choice, basically.
Okay.
Great question. Thank you. All right, folks, we got a few more minutes. Anything else that anybody's thinking about? Thoughts, queries, quotients? Okay. Well, great pleasure to see all of you. That's great. Great questions, by the by. As we move into the next section, move into the microclimates and whatnot, we're getting more into more observations of the site. And at this point, you may have a couple of design ideas that are kind of starting to shine through, because what happens is as we go through the different layers of design observation, we start to see things that as we go through the SWOT analysis, it's like, oh, we're still coming up with that same idea or that same conversation. And that's what's so great about permaculture design, is that it really does go at the same problem through multiple lenses. And when we come to a lens that we go, well, this is a shelter break right here. Obviously, like I have to create a shelter break here. Its height, its composition, all the rest of it, I don't know what that is yet, but that'll be my next approach, as I will then build this shelter break. So if you do start to have these ideas, have a base map sort of towards the end of the portfolio, and just start to put some ideas in there. Start to sketch a few things out. Start to hold those things. And if it makes sense, and if you want to put it at the end of your slide, just say, hey, Javin, I was looking at the zones and the microclimates, and I'm thinking this makes sense here. Like, are you seeing what I'm seeing? I'm happy to make a comment about it, because then it means that once you get to the design portion, you've actually already designed the site. Now you're just researching species or application, or what size and width of your water harvesting earthworks, or what are we looking at for gutters, or looking at pricing. So just think of that as you move on. Sergey, go ahead, sir.
One quick question. The book that you recommended before, Saving the World with Sticks and Rocks, or at least the Watershed.
Yeah.
I cannot find that book. I see that course. I looked at the videos that you're doing with them, but the actual book I cannot find anywhere.
Okay, so the book is open source. I know it's open source because we did the course and they told me it was. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the back end of the course, take a look at the resources, make sure it's there, and then put it into this document at the top. So low-tech erosion control, and highly recommend for anybody who's interested in erosion control is to take a look at the low-tech erosion control preview page for the course. Jeff and Neil did some amazing case study videos, and they're so educational. It's you learn an incredible amount. So yeah, let me just find this here. Module assignment, suggested reading. Okay, I also have it in the back end. All right, what I'll do is I will find that for you, Sergey, and I will put it directly into this document. And if you don't see it by next week, definitely drop me a line, and we'll make sure we grab it for you.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Tyler, you have a quick question.
Yeah, so I was just looking at my grades and I noticed that the lesson 4 assignment is due March 6th, and that the lesson 4 peer review is also marked as due March 6th at the same time. Is that accurate, or should that be a week off?
Probably a week off, and it's inaccurate.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, there's definitely aspects of this course that are designed by committee and sometimes outside committee. I think this was the class where somebody messed up and they put the old template on something, and a bunch of you had used the old one versus the new one. So yeah, every once in a while you get somebody who walks into the course and changes something. So yeah, I will make a note of that and then send that to Dow and Devin. So that was March 6th.
Yeah, peer review is currently showing as due on March 6th.
Perfect.
Does that have anything to do with the spring break in March?
No, it's far too
Okay.
early because the spring break in March is right at the last day.
Yeah.
So that one.
Would you be kind enough to write out that YouTube on Steph? And I've seen it a couple of times, but you're right. It's an incredible example of the hill and how he was able to create all these water features and utilize the land that was undesirable. Do you know what I'm talking about? He
No,
called it Steph
Sepp Holzer.
Sepp. Would you put the spelling in the chat? Just
Yeah, happily. He has a couple of books. Sepp Holzer Permaculture is so dogged. My copy is so dogged, and I've got pages falling out of it. It was amazing. His other book, Desert or Paradise, about his work at Tamara Eco Village in Portugal, was incredible. And then he has a third book that's super expensive, but if you can find it, like, I'm sure all of you know that books can be found on the internet. So if you can find Rebel Farmer, highly recommend reading it. It's one of, I'm not going to say it's the Austrian version of Joel Salatin's Everything I Want to Do is Illegal, because Joel never had the local psychiatric hospital show up with a paddy wagon, a group of 6 burly dudes and a straitjacket to capture him and put him in because he was making terraces in Austria. But that's just one of the stories of Rebel Farmer by Sepp Holzer. And so it's one of those things when people came to crash at my place, family members even, they're like, hey, do you got something fun to read? I'd always give them Rebel Farmer. And in the morning, they're like, I think I understand more of why you do what you do, because that book is just like, it's just the middle finger that Sepp puts towards the Austrian government and the Austrian royal family. Because if you're at the Kramatterhof, which is his original farm, which are what all the videos are about. And actually, a buddy of mine, Zach Weiss, who's his premier student, created the Water Stories community. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. It's been a while since I've been on there. Water Stories. Oh, actually, it was the first thing that came up. Of course it was. Water Stories. Yeah. So you can join the community for free. The course is paid for, but they took all this footage that Zach was putting together for a documentary, of which I was the editor for at one point. And I and a bunch of people were like, why are you putting together a documentary instead of just putting together like a community of education? Because everybody wants to do what Sepp Holzer does, and Zach's infinitely more accessible than Sepp. And he's also a lot nicer. Sepp is not a very congenial man. I asked him a question once, and I understood Dummkopf. I understood that. But basically the translation was, people say you can't ask dumb question. This man has shown you can. And he walked away. He never answered my question. I had one of his prime students come by and tell me about, he's like, oh, so this is how the clay works and that's how that works. I was like, okay, thanks. But Water Stories in the chat here, if you go to Water Stories, there's a series of videos that Zach and Rowley and Apollo, and I think he's got a bigger team now. I think he's got a couple of different editors and educators, but they put together these great short videos that are just phenomenal. And there's a few on Sepp. So you kind of want that download. And then there's some terribly low res, grainy footage of Sepp's place, like from the 1970s or 1980s. It's an old video. And then on YouTube, we talked about this before, but I made a documentary called Facing Fire. And I do a short little review of his place with Joseph, because I had a friend who was able to be up there and did a recording of his place. I'm actually just going to find it now. Tamara. There we go. Kramatterhof. Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to share this here. And this is directly shared at the point where I talk about the Kramatterhof. It's a very short introduction. It's not very long. I was under a time deadline for this doc. It had to be 22 minutes long because it was a granted. And they gave us money to do it. So, oh yeah. Yeah, Max, I don't think there's ever the real father of permaculture, but Masanobu Masanobu Fukuoka, One Straw Revolution and the No Dig Method is a great conversation. I kind of look at permaculture like a smorgasbord that we gave a label. You know, there's main contributors. I kind of think of it like a big watershed. And so when we take a look at somebody like Masanobu, he was a huge contributor. And then if we take a look at like PA Yeomans, he was a huge contributor. And then there's a couple of main tributaries that flow into PA's conversation. And then there's some, you know, people who channeled that to create this idea, David Holmgren and Bill Mollison. And then it kind of, you know, there's this tributary branching pattern that came into these two gentlemen and then has now branched out again. So there's a lot of people whose work they then turned back around. And Sepp's one of them. Sepp has said this many times. He's like, he read about Bill, he read about David, and he was like, oh, I'm doing permaculture. And so there's a lot of people that kind of want to bring themselves under that umbrella. So it's just important to know that it's a compilation disc, you know, it's a collage, it's everybody feeding into. And then, you know, as we get into, you know, first, second, third, fourth, and I don't know if we're at fifth or sixth generation or wave permaculturalists, there's individuals that are now working on that social permaculture side. They're really applying zonation as it comes to people, zonations to self. This is something I've done for a number of years for people who are trying to understand what their passions are and where they're going. This idea of zones of brilliance. I think there's a video actually in your course material about zones of brilliance that I did years ago. So yeah, it's a really interesting grassroots movement that has kind of no beginning and no end, because it's just a collection and compilation of ideas that are being applied. And some of the critiques of permaculture, this idea that it's stolen outright from indigenous people, doesn't really tell the whole picture either, because there's lots of influences, there's lots of conversations, and there's lots of innovations that we have no record of indigeny working with. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. You know, the great thing about the geological record is it can wash away entire sectors of humanity and the divergence of or from or to. So yeah, I just think there's a lot there, and be conscientious of be conscientious about deifying anybody in this space. There's some people who actively try to deify themselves. I would avoid those people like the plague, but generally that keeps you mentally sound and sovereign, because as you're learning from somebody new, you're learning a new subset of what they know, and you're not then saying, well, so-and-so does it this way. It's like, well, here's a new tool. How can I put it in my tool belt? And I always go back to Bruce Lee, you know, take the best, leave the rest, and add something uniquely your own. And this is the great thing, in my opinion, this is the great thing about permaculture. You know, don't be Andrew Millison, don't be Marisha Arbach, don't be Robert Francis, don't be Joe Salatin, don't be Sepp Holzer, you know, don't be any of these individuals. Find that beautiful intersection, that Venn diagram of what permaculture offers as an approach, a toolbox, a way of creating regenerative, sustainable human habitat, and who you are as a person and what it is you want to do. We talked about this at the beginning, this idea of compost and fire. You know, don't think I have to go and do landscapes. Maybe your approach is to take this and bring this into the kitchen. A buddy of mine took a PDC that was specifically for home kitchens. That was it. It was just for people who lived in their home kitchens, loved their home kitchens. They applied the zonation process to where everything was in the kitchen, where the food was sourced from. It really is a mindset or an operating system. And I don't know if you folks have had this experience yet, but you really do see the world through different eyes. You see a lot of opportunity. You see wasted opportunity. For me, it's always water. You know, I'm on a road and I see all of this surface flow coming into rills and runnels, and then I see them coalesce, and now I see like a big divot out of the road, and you're like, oh, I know how that happened. I know how that collected. And I've got a number of tools that I potentially could apply to ameliorate that issue. I know how I can do this now. And that's what's so important about this and everything else we learn, is not to become monocropped, right? We're talking about permaculture, we're talking about polycrops, we're talking about all these things. Well, if permaculture is the only thing you draw from for the rest of your life, you're monocropping your input and your sourcing of information. And that's as problematic as anything else. So just be conscientious about that as you're going throughout this process. There are some brilliant, amazing people in this space, don't get me wrong, but none of them should have your utter respect and devotion. That should be earned over years and should be continually renewed right? We shouldn't just say, well, they did brilliant things back then, I'm going to continue to respect, love, and trust them now. You know, continue up with their body of work and what they do and how they approach life, and, you know, just keep yourself mentally sovereign, because it's an important thing, especially in the way that our society works. It's about, you know, taking wholesale what somebody is saying and then just being a follower, right? This whole conversation of social media is about content creators and then followers of that content. I tend to be more of a hit and run person. I'm, you know, coming to something, learning from something, and then going and seeing how I can apply it instead of being a hard and fast follower or devotee. So
I just want to comment about Zach Weiss. He would talk about acupunctures in the landscape. And so like if you saw a grove of trees, you'd realize that there was probably a creek down there supporting that with water. And so he was, or if you see cattails, then you know that you're probably looking at wetland. And so that was insightful on his part. He was very derogatory towards permaculture, I think initially. I think he's come around. But he was very derogatory, and he would add the disclaimer that he had not studied permaculture. And so now seeing these water stories come to life, and the most recent one was Brad Lancaster and how he lived on rainwater in Arizona. And if any of you know this, Arizona is running out of water. And partially it's because it's drilling the whole wells and they're using the water faster than it's replenishing. And it's part of Las Vegas, the Sin City, that kind of thing. But what he did was literally live off of rainwater. And so that's one of the most recent water stories that came through that I found fascinating. And he talked about how Brad Lancaster's book would be on Al Gore's desk and Warren Buffett. And so he's kind of a unique individual, looked at the world differently. And if you think about cities, there's a lot of sidewalks, asphalt. All of it is about getting the water away from the buildings into the lakes and streams, which go into the rivers, which go into the ocean, rather than staying on the land. And so I thought Brad Lancaster really, he changed some city officials and regulations and brought some really great ideas.
yeah, Brad's an exceptional human. I had a chance to tour him around Vancouver Island once and show him to a couple of spots, but both of his books, so rainwater solutions for drylands, volume 1, volume 2, and volume 1 is in its second edition. I recommend the second edition over the first. Remarkable books. His website, if anybody gets a chance, I think it's called Abundant Rainwater, has tons of free resources, just an incredible array of free resources. And he's an exceptional human being. A couple of courses I took with him were just some of the best ones I took. It's where I learned about solar yoga. So the same thing that we do with that solarscape, you do with your body. And you can kind of get a sense where it is in the landscape, and you trace the sun with your fingers. And the cool thing is that if you hold your fingers, if you hold your fingers just, kind of shook out, not like this and not like this, but just like regular. If you put this index finger over the sun, and then on that same arc, basically your second finger is roughly 15 degrees in between. And so you know where the sun's going to be 15 degrees later, because the earth is 360 degrees. There's 24 hours in a day, thus 15 degrees is an hour. And, things like that. Brad is a very jovial human. He tends to look at the positive things of life. And he did a tour 5 or 6 years ago, all through China, and did a lot of documentation and was consulted on a couple of the reclamation projects for their rivers and waterways, and helped them to kind of see the opportunities. Because he, in his home site there in Tucson, Arizona, he does a lot of what's called in common city term, low impact developments, what he calls a curb cut, which is basically cutting the curb, bringing the water that's coming down that roadway into. I talk about this actually in the very first tutorial in the base map. That there's that opportunity to bring water in from the street, do filtration, use it on your site, and then let it go. Go on its merry little way without inundating or flooding your plants. And we may or may not have done that. a couple of city. I won't even say what the city is. That way no one will ever know. But yeah, he's a brilliant. Yeah, he's one of those figures that I think he was one of the first ones who's like, don't deify me. I'm a terrible human. I have many flaws. If you like my work, that's great. Learn from it, but don't deify me. And then proceeded to tell us some really funny stories about him. I was like, okay, good. Him and Bill are the two reasons why I make sure that people don't ever think of me as anything more as an educator and a guide for whatever leg of the journey you want to join with, and then move on, because there's just, yeah, we should do a whole session just about the incredible humans within permaculture, like the Lila Darwishes of the world, the Jeanette Halls, there's so many, just sort of a wonder board. But anyways, folks, we are definitely over time. It's been such a pleasure. Thanks for your additional questions. Those were fun. And I think I did see something though. There was what was our homework again? Well, you're going into week 4, so I'm pretty sure it's microclimates and zones. To look up what place you mentioned. Sorry, Max, I don't know what you mean by that. Could you clarify? If you're still on. Oh, he is. Max, are you there? Feels like every Zoom is a seance. Max? You're unmuted, but I don't hear you. You want to chat, throw in the chat what to look up, what place you mentioned, what that's about. That'd be good. If I don't see it shortly, then we'll close up. It was the Austrian place. Oh, yeah, the Kramatterhof. There we go. And it's also, if you take a look at that short little clip from my doc, it has all the wording and the writing and all of that in there as well. All right, folks, that was fun. Thanks. You made my amazing voice go into overdrive, which I'm sure was good. So thank you for that. Any questions at all about the additional materials or whatnot, please let me know. Please do watch the tutorials before you reach out with a question. I'm noticing a lot of the questions I've answered in the tutorials, which is why I spent the time to make them. So do look through the tutorials, because I do go into great detail, and do look at the examples. There's lots of great examples of what people have done. And I tend to get everyone to take a look at Adria's, but there's others as well. And we're in the process to make a searchable database of all of those. So hopefully we get that done soon. All right, fine folk. We will see you in 2 weeks, and I will take a look for your new assignments next week. Big thumbs up from everybody. Love it. All right. Take care, everybody. Catch you later. Bye.